Who should be plugging the deficit? Benefit claimants or billionaires?
Well, look, the deficit in the long term needs to be filled by getting the economy back on track so that it's growing and creating strong businesses and good jobs so people are paying taxes when they see their pay rising. And it needs to get back on track because we need to get public spending under control to make sure that our public services are delivering better outcomes for people at better cost. There are too many examples of public services failing people but costing huge amounts of money. You can think about children with additional needs or children's social care or temporary housing. There's a whole list of things that we are working hard to get a grip of. But also, the welfare system had got to a place where it wasn't supporting people in the way that it was designed to. We've now got 1 in 8 young people coming out of education and not going into work or training and staying at home on universal credit payments. We need to make sure that they're given the opportunity to be able to go and work and to benefit from that. And we've been taxing wealthy people too, people with the broadest shoulders. We've changed the non-dom tax status. These are the richest people often in our country. We've changed inheritance tax and capital gains tax to raise more from assets that you might inherit or be able to sell. If you happen to have a private jet, it's now much more expensive to use it after years of it being cheap under Prime Minister Rishi Sunak.
He just mentioned the non-dom tax status, which they significantly weakened their changes on after getting lobbied by the CEO of Blackstone, an asset management firm. So in the grand scale of things, these are not big changes, like the private school VAT, couple of billion, the non-dom tax status, likewise. I think combined, they're still less than the amount of money they're taking away from the disabled.
And we've been adding VAT onto private schools to redistribute that money into the state school system. The country's in a very fragile place, though. The economy is still pretty tough. The public spending settlements that we have are really challenging, and that's why it feels hard right now, and it's not feeling as positive or as easy as we want it to be. But coming into government, we've managed to get a grip of the situation we've inherited, and now we've got to work really hard to be able to turn the country around so that we can start to lift that pressure and deliver opportunity and prosperity for everyone.
Is it not a contradiction?
Wow, what a surprise that your milquetoast fucking meandering around the topic and not answering the question didn't garner a round of applause. That is why you will lose the next election. Well done.
And that's it, because they didn't answer any of the actual serious point here, which is, are the billionaires going to get taxed? Because actually, whilst I'm sure lots of billionaires do send their kids to private school, again, it's not a huge amount that they're actually going to revenue raise from this. And in reality, the problem is with billionaires is that they have loads of assets. Unless they sell those, you're not actually going to be able to claim capital gains taxes, even if you increase capital gains tax to like 1,000,000%, right? You need to actually ensure that you can gain that revenue by getting them either to sell their assets or by having a taxation on the unrealised capital gains, which is what a wealth tax would be, or taxing the land on its value, for example, which they're not doing either. And so that's why, in lieu of tax rises, they're having to do spending cuts. And even then, you have choices. And the choice that they're going with is taking away from literally the most disabled people in the country.
In the government developing a strategy to reduce child poverty and at the same time pushing 50,000 more children into relative poverty.
So look, let me be clear.
By your statement yesterday.
Sure. A Labour government is not going to see child poverty increase in this country. All of us, myself included...
Yes, it is.
Yes, it literally is. Yes, it literally is. Look, she's literally just told you the numbers from your own report, the OBR report that you published. So 50,000 more children will be in relative poverty. 250,000 people in total will be in relative poverty because of you. You did this.
That was honestly that the OBR was taking that from their own impact assessment of the DWP, the one that Liz Kendall said, I'm not going to talk about now, but you can wait until the spring statement. And they knew, because now it gets caught up in the morass of everything else, rather than being front and centre, so that it's harder to scrutinise. It's so nakedly obvious what they're doing here. And this is on top of the fact that the only area in the country where child poverty is predicted to fall is in Scotland, because they're the ones who are trying to mitigate the 2-child benefit cap by doing their own version of reversing that, because they can only use their devolved powers to do that, and so they're implementing a new child benefit that's there to try and undermine it. So that's the only place where it's going to reduce child poverty. Everywhere else, it's all predicted to rise, including in England, which is the majority of the government of the UK has some level of control over. So he's just lying. He's just lying in terms of disabled kids and kids with 2 siblings or more. All of these people are going to be worse off and more likely to be in poverty. And this is a direct choice that this Labour government has made.
According to the OBR, yes, it is.
Well, I'll come to the impact assessment, but look, all of us in the Labour Party, it's the first time I think that the cabinet of our government has been entirely from working class backgrounds, from state school educated backgrounds. I grew up in
Yeah, and you're literally like what the worst Labour government there has ever been.
And even then, like, their metric for working class is state educated. You know, by all means, have more state educated people in government, in parliament. I'm all for it. But when you actually look at these people's real careers, it is like political advisors like Wes Streeting and Yvette Cooper, lawyers like this guy and Shabana Mahmood. You've got someone who used to work for the Bank of England and Rachel Reeves, and Keir Starmer, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions, if you can imagine such a thing, and a member of the Trilateral Commission. Like, I'm sorry, your dad may have been a toolmaker, Keith, but I will judge you by the actual experience of your life as an adult, which has mostly been a very highly and well-paid professional, and not somebody who's had to deal with be living on the breadline, unlike, for example, Angela Rayner. Except when does she ever get put front and centre of Labour Party's communications? She gets shoved to the sidelines like John Prescott being their fucking Bez.
poverty in the 80s and 90s before the last Labour government introduced the national minimum wage and transformed my family's life. We are deeply committed. This is in our DNA. We're deeply committed to wanting
No,
to
it isn't deeply in your DNA. That's not how it fucking works. You get judged by your policies. Look, I literally had to, it made me feel sick to the core of my stomach because Tony Blair is a war criminal who should be at the Hague and or terms of service here, right? Piece of shit. And I literally had to say his government was way to the left of this government in many key areas.
Yeah,
and that
like
is sickening.
Yeah, like there are some things when you could say like the current government being a little bit more expansionary on like some layers of borrowing, for example, like not using PFIs to the same like extent. But they want to go further on deregulation, you know? Remember when Rachel Reeves was starting up during the election campaign on how she was going to undo a bunch of EU regulation to constrain the financial sector by having them with bigger liquidity requirements, and they're making it even more deregulated than Tony Blair did, and that's what led to the global financial crisis.
But like as he's pointing out, they introduced a minimum wage, a thing that the Labour movement had been trying to introduce for a century or more. They introduced tax credits, which were fucking borderline revolutionary in terms of the quality of life of some of the poorest in the country. They introduced pensioner tax credits, ditto. Like they were actually quite bold by comparison to these fucking wankers. They introduced Sure Start. Like that Labour government weren't too terrible in some ways. They were still awful in a number of key other ways and did illegal war crimes and things. But this government are doing the war crimes, and we don't even get the kind of mild social democracy as well.
Yeah, no like welfare capitalism to speak of, because you've got to remember at the National Policy Forum there was a lobbying by the trade unions on the left of the party to get refunding of Sure Start into the manifesto, and Keir Starmer literally tried to block it and was successful. That's how right-wing he is. He's too right-wing for Sure Start.
Which at that point, trade unions, please grow a backbone and stand up and leave the room. Yeah, just get out of there. A party that can't even give you Sure Start, a thing that was achieved 25 years ago, is not. They don't have your best interest at heart. They're not on your side. Get out now.
Call this. Now, the impact assessment you referred to from yesterday, what that shows is that as we are trying to help families get into work, because we know the biggest lever to move child poverty statistics is to get larger families where there are two parents, one of which is not able to work, to help them to get into work. That's the easiest way to help alleviate child poverty. As we help families to do that, the social security payments that are going to those people goes down. That's what the impact assessment shows. What the impact assessment doesn't show is the gain that those families get by then being in work and earning more money.
I mean, you can only guess how many
Pause.
families are going to go into work. You can't know that.
No.
First of all, that's a good point that she's making there, that you can't know that they're going to get into work. But on top of that, the thing they're taking away is something, PIP, which has no work requirement. There is a large number of people who claim PIP who are in work. They're going to lose everything and are more likely to be in poverty as well. Plenty of people are in in-work poverty, and 40% of universal credit claimants are in work. So this idea that somehow you can just magically divine that you're going to push a bunch of people into work, which are actually not going to do that because it's going to be harder to get into work if you don't have a PIP payment keeping you well enough to be in work, whether you're out of work or not, it's for the birds. It's totally for the birds. It's completely inconsistent. And all he's doing here is making shit up and deflecting away from the fact that they are going to be pushing kids into poverty. Little fucking children are going to be put into poverty because of this Labour government, and he has to try and deflect.
No one could give an accurate number on that, that's true, but we put £1 billion into job support yesterday. We put £2 billion already extra into childcare, breakfast clubs in primary schools. We're doing everything we can to make sure that we can create the opportunity of well-paid work, help families to be able to do that, and to help children in the process.
I'm speaking as someone who's got a disabled daughter, and she's 18 now. The cuts that you're all talking about, where is it going to come from? The rich, or is it going to affect the poor? It's going to affect the poor. And I say that because my daughter, who is, as I said, is 18, she's heard in the news this week that these cuts are coming. How is that going to affect her? How is it going to affect everybody that suffers from those kind of disabilities? Yet she's also heard that the MPs are going to get a 2.8% raise on their salaries. Now, how does that justify? Is it you're taking it from my daughter and you put it in your pocket? That's how she sees it.
Gary, I'm going to come to it. Just very
I'm
quickly
straight.
answer that point.
People that need help are going to get it.
The PIP cuts are to people who are already qualifying for PIP when they get reassessed. You've essentially said that people who are currently qualified through the very rigorous and humiliating PIP assessment are getting it undeservedly. Shameful. Shame on you, Darren Jones.
There's going to be lots of people who aren't going to get it. Otherwise, you can't cut the bill.
Well,
you don't start taking things from people, the bill is going to remain the same.
Sure. But as I was saying earlier, the problem that we had was that the budget we had to help people, as it sounds like your daughter, with disabilities that need support and need protection.
The point is, how come you're getting more money and his daughter may get less?
That's the question. That's what we want to know. That's what people like my daughter, who can't go to work. She cannot go to work. She has to rely on those disability allowances. How is it that you can get a pay rise, but it's going to be taken away from them?
Sure. No, I understand. And I'm just saying that by the sounds of it, your daughter will continue to be supported, and that's what the system is there to do. But to answer...
You're going to lose the election. You fucking... Look at this guy. This guy wanted an answer, and you haven't given it to him. That's a vote lost forever. Well done, Darren Jones.
You cannot guarantee that she won't lose it, because it's up to the PIP assessment, right? She might not be able to work currently, but who's to say that she'll definitely get at least 1-4 across all of the different PIP assessment criteria outside of the mobility one? You don't know this, Darren. You don't know. Or she might do, she might not. There's no solace for the people who are now worried sick about the fact that their next reassessment they might lose all of their money. Plus their limited capability for work-related activity increase within the universal credit too. You can't guarantee this, Darren.
To your point about pay rises, across the public sector, this is one of the things that I'm responsible for as Chief Secretary to the Treasury, whether it's doctors and nurses or teachers or prison officers. We have to come to an agreement around what pay rises are for public sector workers. For MPs, that's not a decision that I take as a minister or we take as MPs. It's taken independently by Parliament with reference to what's happening in the rest of the economy. But the key point there is...
Is it a bit awkward, though, in the circumstances?
Well, I mean, yes.
Yes. OK. There we go. Gary. The question. Who should be
That's the thing
paying
as
the
well.
deficit? Benefit claimants or...
It's fine for MPs to have pay rises. I don't really care whether they have the pay rises or not, But, of course, it does look bad at the same time as taking away money from the disabled. But if they really, really, genuinely believe that they personally don't deserve one and they don't want to have it because they think it's bad, give it to charity. It was good enough for Nadia Whittam, it was good enough for Dennis Skinner. It's good enough for you.
Zara Sultana's doing that, apparently, as well.
Or billionaires?
This is very frustrating for me. I've been screaming for 5 years that this is going to happen, that this situation will get worse and worse and worse, which it has been doing. I was betting on it for 10 years before that. For people who don't know who I am, I was Citibank's #1 trader in the world in 2011. I got paid millions of pounds because I bet that our economy would collapse because you wouldn't deal with growing inequality. I quit that job in 2014 to try and stop that inequality from growing. I was doing that in private until the beginning of COVID, when it became clear that inequality would increase enormously. Does anyone know what the total government deficit is since the beginning of COVID? It's £1 trillion now, which is £20,000 for every single adult in the country. So if every single one of you is not £20,000 cash richer, someone else has your money.
Is that the debt or the
Yes.
deficit?
It's the increase in the debt, which is the
debt,
deficit.
right, yeah.
Does anyone know who has that £1 trillion?
I think you might be about to tell us.
It is the richest people in the country. It is the richest people in the country. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. If we pause the economy and give £1 trillion, £20,000 for every adult in this room and the rest of the country to the richest people in the country, and then unpause the economy, what do you think will happen to living standards for ordinary people? They will collapse. This is a problem of growing wealth inequality. The extremely rapid growth of wealth of the richest people in the country. The average billionaire increased their wealth by £630 million in the first year alone of COVID.
When you say it's
That
the
is
wealthy
squeezing-
people, isn't things like the Canadian pension funds and all that sort of thing?
It's the wealthiest individuals in the country. It's multimillionaires and billionaires. These are the guys.
But also massive pension funds from abroad.
And here.
And who are the overwhelming owners of those pension funds? The richest people in the country. Listen, these men and women are not £20,000
Well, they're
richer.
pensioners. I don't know if they're the richest people in the country, but okay.
Who here's
Carry on.
£20,000 cash rich than before COVID?
But the older you are, the richer you are, generally. So actually, pensioners are some of the richest. They're also some of the poorest, but they're also the richest.
And also, pension funds make their money off of the rise of the stock market elsewhere, all of the things that they own in their index funds. You know, that's where they make their money, is off the index funds that they own. And the majority of actual stocks and shares are owned by rich people. And that's where a lot of this excess wealth is going to. The people who have, like, stock options in companies they own and things like that. That's where the wealth has spiraled from. Like, sure, there'll be some kickbacks for pension funds, but we can't have the entirety of the social security for a bunch of... We can't have a bunch of the retirement funds for huge numbers of the members of the economy entirely dependent on the richest continually getting richer. That's a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah, welcome to capitalism. Yeah.
I'll tell you who probably is. Every single person on this panel, OK? The richest people in the country are getting richer.
Hang on, don't include us in all this. I don't know if you've seen the way the BBC works, but they're not exactly raising salaries by that much.
All I'm going to say is, this growth in wealth inequality, it is going to keep the middle class and the working class poor. It is going to gut government services, and that is the people in this room. Their kids, their grandkids will be poor.
Gary, you've obviously...
because we are not dealing with wealth inequality.
Well, you rightly say, you spent a lot of time thinking about this.
And it's important, right? The key reason is that once you give all of this wealth to all of these rich people, they buy up everybody else's assets. So houses and the things that were previously owned by the public sector that are now in private hands that were sold off by all the Thatcherites from 79 until today, they own those assets now. Like, the number of assets hasn't increased as fast as the growing wealth inequality. They bid in those markets for those houses, and the price spikes enormously, and it has continued to do so since the start of the pandemic. And that is out competing regular working class people to be property owners. That is the biggest problem that we have, is that, especially when it comes to housing, is that we are now allowing houses to be bought up by oligarchs and rented back to people. You know, index funds and asset management firms are buying houses to then rent back to people and spiraling the cost out of control because it's a speculative asset since it was privatized after the 1980s.
Also, they didn't like him poking fun at them there. I would guarantee that everyone around that table is a millionaire.
Well,
I'd be very surprised if that weren't the case.
Camilla Tominey gets paid most likely a six-figure salary for working 3 hours a day. Because I know full well that GB News pump huge amounts of money into exorbitant salaries for their panellists.
Unbelievable shit. And also, yeah, he didn't say salaries. He said your worth, like your net worth, which will be millions. The only person who might not be maybe is Daisy Cooper, possibly. I don't know her background particularly, but
yeah, who the fuck is not being a Liberal Democrat?
Yeah, yeah, you don't get many kickbacks if you haven't got any power. Yeah. Also, well done, Gary. I mean, genuinely the first good answer I've heard on this TV show in months.
What do you think the solution or solutions might be?
And you'd think the Labour Party would look at that and go, he got 2 rounds of applause for that in, like, Kent. No, again, not red area. That you think they'd look at that and go, maybe there's votes they had in not being evil. Maybe people might not despise us if we weren't truly demonically evil. But no, they've been bought and paid for.
We have to shift the tax system. We have a tax system which taxes ordinary working people 30, 40, 50, 60%, while people like the Duke of Westminster can inherit £10 billion and pay nothing. If you do that, wealth will be sucked out of the middle class. It's already been completely bankrupted the working class. It will bankrupt the government, which is what we are seeing, and there'll be poverty. There'll be broad poverty. There'll be no middle class left. Why are we taxing working people more than billionaires? Tax wealth, not work. Give these people a break. Give their kids a chance. Tax the billionaires. Of course you should.
Okay.
3. You got 3 rounds of applause. 3 for one answer. You think, again, anyone looking to try and win votes might look at that and think, oh, that seems like quite a popular policy position.
Yeah, maybe there is some electoral capital to be gained by appealing to it.
True, but can these people buy Keir Starmer a box at the Arsenal? Have any of these people thought about buying Sabrina Carpenter tickets for the Chancellor?
And just briefly, You will know as well as I do that wealth taxes have been tried in a number of countries. Only Switzerland has stuck with it. I mean, they've got no capital gains tax, they've got no inheritance tax, they've got a slightly different situation.
Yep.
But most countries have abandoned them because they don't bring in that much revenue. What makes you think it would be different here?
Fiona, we did it here. We did it here. We did it here in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and people like my dad, people like my granddad, who was a bus conductor, were able to buy houses, have financial security, have pensions, have retirements, go on holidays. We did it here. We did it here, and we're losing that now because we're not taxing the rich are getting richer, and ordinary families are losing the ability to buy houses, have kids. We can do it. We've done it before.
OK.
And on top of
Man
that...
there in the beige sweater.
On top of that, there are countries that have had successful wealth taxes that aren't Switzerland. Like Norway have a 1.1% wealth tax that is continually to the left of the Laffer curve. They increased it from 8.8% to 1.1% just recently, and that brought an extra $100 million a year. Now, they're a smaller economy, but it's not a huge wealth tax anyway. But the idea that it would lead to huge amounts of capital flight and put them to the right of the Laffer curve isn't true. That's just not true at all. And even then, it's not even for revenue raising. It's to stop the rich out-competing the poor for assets and resources. That is the main utility of a wealth tax. And it's not necessarily to fund government spending, because that comes from the central bank anyway. It's from stopping the inordinate power that rich people have, not just to buy up the assets and outcompete the members of the public, but also to buy our politicians and outcompete us in the democratic realm as well.
Also, interesting from the supposedly neutral chair of the meeting there, that all of a sudden she's become an expert on who has a wealth tax and how it's worked and in which countries, and fucked it up as well. It's almost like the manufacturing consent machine was turned on briefly there.
1,000 millionaires per month left the UK last year.
Wrong.
That's one every 45
Wrong.
minutes.
So, I don't know if you've seen this, Kev, but this stat has been quoted a lot over the last few weeks. Do you know where it comes from?
Probably some sort of Tufton Street wank bank.
It is from a think tank, and it's from the the high net worth individuals, like think tank lobby group or whatever. Do you know how they found out? Do you know how they estimated the number of millionaires leaving the country?
They picked a random number out of a bag.
Close. They were looking at people's locations on LinkedIn. I swear this is true. I swear this is true.
Bastards, man.
They have literally there's a report on the high net wealth individual migration report, and their source for this data is looking at a certain number of people who changed their locations on LinkedIn. It wasn't even like the total number, it was a sample size, and then they extrapolated that outwards.
The top 1% pay 30% of taxes, the top 10% pay 60% of taxes. We need to get growth in this country. If we raise taxes even more, we're already one of the highest tax-paying countries in the world. We're going to encourage it.
Because again, it's just totally wrong. Like, we're lower than quite a lot of countries, OECD especially, in terms of our taxation as a percentage of GDP. We've been pretty low for a while in that. It's only recently it's increased, but it's increased everywhere else as well, because we've all got problems with demographic aging across the West, right? And on top of this, he says, well, the top rate of earners, the top 1% pay 60% income tax. And I'm like, but we're talking about wealth, not income. First of all, we used to pay higher taxes on the highest rates of income anyway. It was 90% in the 50s and 60s, and then 70% in the 70s. And even then, that's still income, not wealth, right? Gary already says tax wealth, not work. People who earn their money and are high earners are getting taxed heavily, but people who make their money from capital, the bourgeois, if you want to use a Marxist terminology, those who own the means of production or who own stocks and shares or property, they pay far less tax because they would pay capital gains only if they realise those gains by selling, and they pay dividend taxation, which is even lower than capital gains.
Exactly. Absolutely fucking right.
And it's going to create a bigger problem. I appreciate Gary's passion for inequality, and I agree with it. Britain is broken, but I do not believe raising taxes is the answer.
Okay.
I can see Gary's argument, because regardless of us all paying more tax, and let's be honest, you're quite right to say that working people particularly are taxed way too much. In an area like Dartford, you have to question the sense of, on one hand, taxpayers' cash being used to build something like the Dartford crossing, and then on the other, being charged the DART charge to use it. It feels like we're not just taxed once, but multiple times if you factor in income tax, VAT, council tax, fuel duty, car tax and all the rest of it. So that's a problem. Having said that, when we do look at episodes in history where the rich have been taxed more. For instance, you mentioned 1950s Britain. Let's look at 1950s America. Back in 1950s America, the top rate of tax was a staggering 91%.
And it was one of the richest periods in the history of Earth. Our species has rarely known a better financial time for white people. But I understand there were some racial issues, but for white people, it was the richest time and place ever.
However, unemployment shot up to 8%, and there were 4 recessions in that period. So I think the man here raised a point about capital flight.
Unlike, thankfully, during the Reaganite era, where recessions just don't happen anymore.
Yeah, and you want to make a comparison in this country where we didn't have any recessions in the 1950s, and we just about had one in the 1960s.
Yep.
And then the 80s came around where we got rid of all of the high levels of taxation and we ripped up all of public ownership, privatized everything, and then lived off of oil money for 2 decades. We had 3 recessions. There were 3 recessions under Thatcher. And even then, like, the biggest recession in, like, American history was the Great Depression. That was the biggest period of economic stagnation, was the Great Depression. And it was quite literally high taxation, high borrowing, Keynesian growth, macroeconomics that took them out of the Great Depression. It was FDR's New Deal that did that.
And the only thing literally holding America together in terms of infrastructure was infrastructure built during that period. Literally all of the roads, all of the fucking, all of the bridges, they're all from then. All of the fucking Hoover Dam, everything. It's all from then. They haven't been building anything. Honestly, the Reaganite Thatcherite revolution has destroyed the core of Western infrastructure.
Yeah, there's a great quote from Rory Wood, God rest his soul, who said that, isn't it funny how in the 1980s we sold everything off to private companies and now literally nothing works but 5 people are richer than God?
Yes.
We need to make a decision as to whether we want millionaires' cash to go into the exchequer or not. I appreciate that millionaires and billionaires do have a habit, seemingly, of avoiding quite a lot of tax. But let's use the example of Sir Jim Ratcliffe, okay, the owner of Ineos. Before he moved to Monaco in 2020, he was adding hundreds of millions to HMRC. Now he's contributing nothing because he's a classic example of, if the tax take gets too high, then unfortunately contributions go down because the rich...
Okay, but we keep your assets then. You can leave.
And on top of that...
Go for it. But we keep your shit.
On top of that, she's just wrong. The tax take has increased. We are still to the left of the Laffer curve. Like, if tax take had gone down, maybe she'd have a point. But it hasn't, so she doesn't. Like,
do you think that China would allow somebody to own billions and billions and billions of pounds of Chinese assets and then move to Monaco and not pay tax on those assets?
I have no idea what the policy would be in China, but then lots of billionaires in China are reliant on slave labour, so it's probably not the best example.
Listen, we have given the...
What the fuck has that got to do with it? What the fuck?
Newsflash, Camilla. Lots of billionaires in Britain also rely on slave labour. It's because they're billionaires. Their entire existence is predicated on exploitation. That's how you become a billionaire. And on top of this, Gary is basically right. If you don't want to pay tax in China, the goon squad shows up. Whereas we go, oh no, you don't want to pay taxes, go and become monegasque. You go and get your citizenship of the tax haven. China, when the billionaires start acting up, I'm not going to say for Twitch what happens, but I think people know.
Yeah, things happen. Yes, exactly. And notice the savage brutality with which they'll deal with the disabled. But when it comes to the billionaires, we need to pussyfoot around them. We need to be super nice, otherwise they'll leave. Or they'll leave. Will they? We've got ways that we could make their assets not leave. They can fuck off if they want to. I don't care. I won't miss them.
Actual assets of this country to very, very, very wealthy people. And we have created a tax system that makes it voluntary for them to pay tax. If you do that, ordinary people will get poorer and poorer and poorer every year. And millionaires and billionaires will get richer and richer every year. And ordinary people will not be able to buy homes and have families.
But Gary,
and I'm not just saying that, I bet on that.
Rich don't pay tax in the UK, are you?
The tax burden is falling on working people. Working people pay rates on much higher levels.
But you also agree, I appreciate that working people are paying tax. Everyone's paying tax. Is anyone who's working not paying tax?
What the fuck? Are you actually brain dead?
Oh, she works for GB News, yes.
Everyone's paying tax. Are you paying tax? Who to pay the tax? Address the point he's making. It is functionally voluntary, a lot of the tax on rich people. poor people are paying disproportionately a higher percentage of the tax to keep us in a functioning, operating, thriving civilization.
Again, what she's going to do here is she's going to conflate income with wealth.
Yeah.
She's going to say, oh, well, the top 1% of earners pay lots of tax. And I'm like, well, that's true. But we're not talking about earners. We're talking about owners. We're not talking about the people who go out and earn their labour for a wage. We're talking about people who own loads of assets and use that capital to take out loans to be able to pay for day-to-day spending. We pay far less tax than everybody else because we don't have a wealth tax.
The rich do pay their taxes. You're saying that you think they should pay more tax on their wealth? And are you differentiating between wealth or inheritance?
Wealth. They should pay tax on their wealth. If you don't tax these people on their wealth, they will squeeze everybody
Inheritance becomes wealth as soon as it's inherited, you dumb bastard.
out.
And the European examples where that's been tried, France, Norway, etc., where they've had to scrap those schemes because...
Norway has not scrapped that scheme. Stop lying.
They've increased it, in fact, and it's generated more revenue.
A, they're too much to administrate, and B, they don't get enough revenue in. What's your response to that? Because it's not as if European nations haven't tried this. They've tried it, and unfortunately, it's failed.
Yeah, whenever people suggest this to me, I always think of the Conservative second home stamp duty tax. Do you remember that?
Yeah, but do you want to answer that question?
Yeah, I'm answering it now.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm answering it now.
What do you think we would do differently that the European countries have not done?
When the second home stamp duty tax was brought in, I was very surprised because I didn't think the Conservatives would tax rich people. I looked into it. There was an exemption for people who bought 7 or more homes at once. And then Jeremy Hunt went and bought 7 homes. Listen, I understand it is difficult to tax rich people because politicians are rich people and they're funded by rich people and they put loopholes in the system that mean rich people don't pay them. And it ends up being paid by working people. That doesn't mean we don't do it.
Okay, I'm not sure that's answered the question. And I've no idea if Jeremy Hunt did buy 7 homes instead, but, you know, I appreciate that's what he's saying.
Yeah, cover your ass there. Well done.
Guarantee that the wealth tax receipts go to the poor. This is the other problem.
Let me bring
Daisy. Public sector pay rises for train drivers that are already on good.
Oh no! Imagine that. And where are they going to hoard their money? Oh no, they're not. They're going to spend it. It's fine, actually.
Literally, she's trying to pit train drivers against billionaires. Like, if that shouldn't tell you that these GB News, Telegraph, Spectator, Paul Marshall-funded motherfuckers are just the bourgeois in the class war, then I don't know what else to tell you. They're defending billionaires by attacking train drivers, the people who are out there getting you to work every day. These people are scumbags. They're vermin. Literally, a useful person like a train driver is worth 1 million Camilla Tominis. Yeah, because they're out working 5 days a week doing 8-hour days. This motherfucker works 4-day weeks and does 3 hours work a day, speaking to a bloody microphone. And again, I'll point out, I can say this because my job is speaking into a microphone for 3 hours a day. I full well can criticise her for doing what I do. And unlike these motherfuckers, we're not on 6 figures. Hint, hint, chat. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership. It's just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.